Are you not entertained? Hey, Brian.
Hey, welcome back.
Yes, welcome back to Dream Idiots, everybody. My name is Morris. The other fellow's Brian. Each week we tell each other stories and drag you along for the ride. We also have a little thing we call the curse word of the week. Brian, where can the good folks find us if they are so inclined, besides here where they're listening to us?
We are on pretty much every single podcast platform out there, I think, at this point. So if you're listening to us now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Podchaser or any of I don't know, the lesser grade, lesser known, please give us 5 stars, shoot us a review. That's helpful and helps us climb the charts. We would appreciate it. You can drop us a line at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots, and dreamidiots.com is the website. So there's merchandise there for the website, and the entire back catalog of stuff is there as well. And just one small announcement, only because I'm getting a little bit excited about it. We have a special edition episode coming up here, maybe as soon as next week. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on it, but we have a special single one-off episode called Bullet in the Window Frame and coming here soon. So look forward to that, which is going to be, I hope, mind-blowing for some folks.
Not literally, but figuratively mind-blowing,
Figuratively
as
mind-blowing.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, that is something to look forward to. Um, and that will be coming up, like you said, soon. So within the next couple episodes, I would imagine. If not, we will still have more stuff to talk about. So we have to put that one on the burner for a while. Um, Brian, any other announcements?
That's it. We're good to go.
Are you ready for my story
I am.
of episode 128? This is Eugene Landy, part two, Hang On to Your Ego. And a couple of notes real quick. Thanks again to Marvin for reading, our listener Marvin in San Antonio for reading a draft, or at least listening to me read a draft of this particular story. And if you recall, Eugene Landy was kind of a self-made guy. He was a manager of George Benson at the age of 14. Benson was 10 years old, and he ended up getting a degree in psychiatry, or psychology rather, not psychiatry, psychology, and he practiced what he called milieu therapy, or 24-hour therapy. That involves being with your patient or being ready there for them 24 hours a day. And I talked about a few of the people that he worked with, some of the folks that he worked with, and I'm going to talk about perhaps his greatest, biggest, most well-known client today. Um, are you ready, Brian?
I'm ready.
In 1966, the Beach Boys released what many critics considered to be their masterpiece, an album titled Pet Sounds. It was meticulously produced by Beach Boys' ostensible leader and chief songwriter, Brian Wilson, the eldest brother of Dennis and Carl, who, along with cousin Mike Love and childhood friend Al Jardine, comprised the original lineup of the band. Pet Sounds was the latest salvo in a perceived battle between Brian Wilson and the Beatles, who had released their latest album, Rubber Soul, in 1965, prior to Pet Sounds. Paul McCartney had said on more than one occasion that the Beach Boys had inspired their best work, and surely the Fab Four wouldn't be able to top Wilson's studio masterpiece, the best example of his Teenage Symphonies to God he produced. Pet Sounds was a departure from the previous albums focused on Southern California surf culture. Not that there's anything wrong with those earlier songs. They're filled with amazing harmonies and meticulously performed and produced. Pet Sounds was and is nothing short of amazing. The album is second only to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On from Rolling Stones magazine's Top 500 Albums list published December 23rd,
Oh, wow.
2023. The Beatles dropped Revolver later in 1966 and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967, and Brian pretty much completely lost his shit. For the record, pun intended, on the aforementioned Rolling Stone Top 500 Albums list, Rubber Soul checks in at 35, Sgt. Pepper at 24, and Revolver at number 11. Brian started working on the next Beach Boys project, Smile, which he eventually discarded for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was his mental health. Brian's deterioration became readily apparent. While on tour around Christmas 1964, mid-flight from Los Angeles to Houston, Brian started crying uncontrollably, most likely lamenting his spur-of-the-moment marriage to Marilyn Ravel earlier in the month. He made it through the Christmas Eve show in Houston the next day, but after that, Glenn Campbell filled in for him. In January of 1965, Brian announced that he would no longer tour, preferring the isolation of the studio. He was overeating. His personal hygiene was non-existent, and he was starting to exhibit severe reclusive tendencies. Now, that's not to say the other Beach Boys took it easy in the 1960s. Carl Wilson, the younger brother of Bryan and Dennis, spent a great deal of time fighting his draft notice with his conscientious objector status. Cousin Mike Love spent the 1960s practicing transcendental meditation and would later become an instructor. Love spearheaded a 1968 joint tour between the Beach Boys and his guru, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who had introduced Love and instructed him in transcendental meditation along with the Beatles. Bandmates Dennis Wilson and Al Jardine participated in TM as well. This tour had 29 dates planned, but only 5 actually took place. This odd experiment was canceled after 3 days. It seems Beach Boys fans simply hated the Yogi's portion of the program. Mike Love also spent time being Mike Love, a familiar topic for Beach Boys fans. While Love had been absolutely crucial to the Beach Boys' success, contributing to arrangements, lyrics, and vocals, Love had and has a reputation for resisting the new musical direction Pet Sounds offered, as well as, according to journalist Eric Hidegard, being, quote, one of the biggest assholes in rock and roll history. Just check out his 1988 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame acceptance speech for evidence of this assholery. I'll leave it at that, as this is far too large a subject for the story. Al Jardine seems to have had a relatively quiet 1960s, although he did waver between his band and a possible career in dentistry. Jardine's role in the group expanded quite a bit once Bryan set up camp in the studio. Overall, Al was pretty normal in comparison to the other Beach Boys, particularly Dennis Wilson. You remember what he played with the band, Bryan? Dennis?
I don't know.
Dennis Wilson was often seen as the pretty Beach Boy, lacking in musical talent, something he would disprove with his excellent 1977 solo album, Pacific Ocean Blue, and it is a fantastic record.
Mm-hmm.
Audrey Wilson, the boy's mother, legendarily had to coax elder brother Bryan into letting Dennis, quote, join his little band. Dennis played drums. It should be noted here that Dennis was the only member of the band who could actually surf. Dennis hosted for a while a group of hippies in his Malibu home after giving a ride to a pair of young women he saw hitchhiking along the Sunset Strip in the spring of 1968. This was not an unusual thing for Dennis to do, as his house saw its share of visitors who would hang out for a while, party hard, do drugs, and then take off. As Dennis chatted with the 2 young women back at his home, apparently over a snack of milk and cookies, he told them of his interest in and practice of transcendental meditation. Dennis also spoke at length about his guru, the aforementioned Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. During this conversation, Dennis's 2 hitchhikers told him they also studied under a guru, and his name was Charlie. And that's how the Manson family came to live with Dennis Wilson in the summer of 1968.
Oh, yeah, I recall that connection. Yeah.
Finally, casting a long shadow over the Beach Boys' early years was the Wilson brothers' notorious father, Murray Wilson. Murray's own father had been an abusive alcoholic, so Murray didn't have much in the way of a parental role model. He was merciless with all his boys. One alleged beating involved hitting Bryan in the head with a 2x4. This may have contributed to Bryan's almost total loss of hearing in his right ear. It's amazing that he is almost deaf in his right ear, the great Bryan Wilson. But a number of possible incidents may have caused this, including a congenital defect. Murray seemed to really take his frustrations out on Dennis, beating the crap out of him with wild abandon. And this was before Dennis let the Manson family crash his pad. Now that we've set the stage for the amount of fuck-uppedness of the Beach Boys' personal struggles in general, let's return to Bryan Wilson specifically. He suffered from auditory hallucinations since at least 1965. He also had paranoid delusions, particularly that, quote, the devil's out to get me, as he said much later. My brain just got burned out, he reflected in a 1991 interview. In addition to these conditions and his overeating, by 1968, Bryan had developed a pretty regular habit of drinking to excess, smoking marijuana, and downing amphetamines. He needed the capper, though, the chef's kiss to his food, pot, speed triumvirate, so he added cocaine to the mix. He was also known to use heroin and LSD at various points during this time. Bryan was misdiagnosed more than once over the years, the final determination being that of schizoaffective disorder. This condition could, and in Bryan's case did, include hallucinations, depression, paranoia, and mania. In 1975, Marilyn Wilson, Bryan's wife, was at the breaking point with her husband's drug intake and generally self-destructive behavior. So she called upon Dr. Eugene Landy for help. And for the next year, Landy's 24-hour therapy was the program for Bryan Wilson. His team became involved in every aspect of Bryan's life, a condition which became, as described by journalist Diane Sawyer, a kind of boot camp. As Landy himself put it, I had to be crazier than Bryan. There's only room enough for one crazy person in Bryan's head, and it's got to be me. I have to be the ultimate power in this situation. An exercise regimen was introduced, which was great for Wilson's health and mood, like it is for most people. The refrigerator was padlocked, a physical barrier to Wilson's overeating. When Wilson lolled about in bed, not wanting to start the day, a bucket of cold water was his alarm clock. A psychiatrist also prescribed medications for him. When asked over a decade later if Landy had saved his life, Bryan Wilson responded, absolutely. He had lost an amazing amount of weight and was able to return to production duties for the Beach Boys. Now, there was a severe financial cost to Bryan's treatment, however. Landy was charging somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 a month.
Damn.
Adjusted for inflation, that's over $110,000 in today's money. Landy was fired in 1976. Things puttered along in the Beach Boys world until 1982 when Bryan overdosed on a combination of drugs and alcohol. In 1983, Landy was rehired. Somewhere in this period of time, Wilson became his only patient. This relationship would last several years, although the exact nature of it is unclear. Landy claims the patient-therapist arrangement ceased in 1987, yet some reports indicate he was still paid as late as 1991 at the rate of $35,000 a month.
God.
So what exactly was Eugene Landy to Bryan Wilson during this period? Well, for starters, they formed a company together, Brains and Genius, which was a collaborative effort in the field of books, music, and other media. Landy received co-writing credit on several songs, as well as executive producer status on Bryan's self-titled 1988 comeback album titled Bryan Wilson. When asked in an interview, do you contribute to Bryan's songs? Landy responded, why not? I influence all his thinking. All the Beach Boys contribute, and I'm practically a member of the band.
Scumbag.
Landy received 25% copyright to Bryan's songs written during this period, whether he contributed or not. This was revised in 1985 to include only the songs he actually co-wrote. Bryan, does this at all sound like an appropriate relationship between a physician and his former patient, or a psychologist and his former patient?
No, I mean, I'm sorry, the whole do no harm. This seems completely fucked in about 3 different ways, at least.
Landy, about this time, also claimed to have co-written Barry Maguire's song Eve of Destruction using the nom de plume P.F. Sloan. The real P.F. Sloan made it perfectly clear that Landy was lying his ass off. Members of the band, friends, family, and even Bryan's attorney paint a different picture of Landy's role in Bryan's life, that of gatekeeper. Dean Torrance, one half of Jan and Dean, whose songs and ethos resembled early Beach Boys material, was good friends with Bryan. Torrance claims that he tried to contact Wilson several times over the years, only to get screened out by Landy or one of his assistants. In an interview with Diane Sawyer in Primetime Live in 1991, Wilson denies that Torrance ever contacted him. From that same report, Mike Love put it bluntly. And this is where I really agree and applaud Mike Love. We don't have access to him. Landy thinks that Bryan is the goose that laid the golden egg. Even Bryan's daughters, Carney and Wendy, themselves musicians, as 2/3 of Wilson Phillips in the 90s, had virtually no contact with him. One source indicates that they each had a 1-hour visit with him over a 9-year span.
Unreal.
All owing to Eugene Landy's influence. John Mason, Bryan's attorney, was shut out too, and he alleges that on the rare occasions he did meet with Bryan, the musician was always accompanied by Landy. During these conferences, if Bryan dared to contradict his therapist, Landy immediately gave him pills. Mason said that in one instance, Bryan was so drugged that his, quote, eyes rolled up behind his lids. Later in the 1980s, Bryan would develop tardive dyskinesia, or facial tics, most likely a side effect from all of the medications being prescribed through Landy's treatment. Now, Bryan, I sent you a video earlier that's a short clip. And the first voice we're going to hear, let's just listen to it. The first voice we're going to hear is that of Dr. Carl Landy. It's a very short clip. You got it ready?
Yep.
He was Tom Ewell had called me in and said, we are worried that Brian Wilson is going to follow Elvis.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, that's what Tom said to me. He said, we've got to do something. We can't let him just stay 300 pounds. Didn't you know that?
Yeah, so the first voice we heard was Landy, and he was referring specifically to Brian's severe weight at the time. And the second voice we heard was that of Brian Wilson himself. Bryan, could you describe what you saw visually in that scene and what it did to you on the inside?
I mean, Landy's basically sitting almost on top of him, sitting so close to him. Like it's a puppeteer. I mean, one arm around him, just very parental, very controlling, very, very weird.
And it's also like the hand that's around on his shoulder is almost to the point of a white knuckle death grip, like someone would have on their steering wheel in a car accident. I mean, he is holding him tightly around the shoulders. It's a very creepy and unsettling arrangement.
Nuts. Yeah. and that was in what year, that recording?
I believe that was 83 when he started up his second treatment with him.
Okay.
Brian Wilson was, for this period of time, always seen in Landy's presence, or at least with one of Landy's assistants. One of Landy's former employees, under the condition of anonymity, confirmed Landy's ongoing attempts to completely isolate Brian Wilson. Landy denies all of this, calling the stories of call screening and isolation, quote, lies. He claims to have been keeping Brian away from the negative influences of family and friends. Diane Sawyer asked Brian Wilson about this, and she suggested that his isolation was a type of prison. Brian responded, well, life is a prison in itself.
Okay.
He kept him away from his children. I mean, to me, that's the worst thing that this guy did. I mean, in 1989, Brian Wilson's will was revised. Surprise! Landy was the chief beneficiary, with 70% of the estate coming to him, the remaining to be split up between Brian Wilson's daughters. And then this is kind of strangely worded, as far as I can surmise. It's to be split up between Brian Wilson's daughters and Landy's girlfriend at the time. Now, the wording is a bit unclear, so they may have meant Wilson's girlfriend, but I'm fairly sure it's Landy's girlfriend they're talking about. By 1989, the California Board of Medical Quality had had enough of Eugene Landy and revoked his psychology license. Part of this was due to his questionable relationship with Wilson, in which he acknowledged that he distributed drugs illegally. He's a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. There were other stories, too, including a sexual assault of a former patient. Another claims Landy freebased cocaine with them. All of these fell under the umbrella of, quote, grossly negligent conduct. 1990 saw Brian's almost complete estrangement from his family and the Beach Boys. The decade also saw several legal battles between the Beach Boys and the Wilson family. Stan Love, another cousin, became the public face for the Wilson family as he sued for conservatorship in a bid to get Landy out of the picture, but it was an unsuccessful attempt. Brian Wilson's mother, his daughters, and brother Carl filed legal action in May of 1981 in another attempt to wrest Brian away from Landy. This time it worked. Sort of. I'll address that in a bit. Also in 1991, Wouldn't It Be Nice? My Own Story was published. It was Brian's first memoir, and the fallout from it was spectacular. Ostensibly written by Wilson and journalist Tony Gold, it was most likely co-written by Eugene Landy. Right. And boy, did people hate this fucking book. There were accusations of plagiarism, and there were lawsuits filed as well. No less than Mike Love, Carl Wilson, Mom Audrey Wilson, and Al Jardine all sued on defamation grounds. Mike Love also sued for writing credits and royalties. Brian Wilson sued his former conservator, Jerome Billett, for basically being a shitty conservator. And he also sued Irving Music to get right back for the songs his father had published. All total, Melinda Wilson, Brian's second wife, reports that there were 9 separate lawsuits to which Wilson was a party during this time, some of which would not get resolved for over a decade. It was a mess. Back to Landy. In 1992, he was legally barred from contact with Bryan Wilson, which was great. He promptly violated that order by visiting Bryan on his birthday of that year. That was not great. Landy's team apparently kept working with Bryan for some time. Eventually, Landy drifted out of Beach Boys life and maintained psychology license in New Mexico and Hawaii. I don't think he ever tried to get it back in the state of California. Now it's time for exits. Murray Wilson, the patriarch of the family, died of a heart attack in 1973. Audrey Wilson, the mother, died in 1997 of kidney and heart failure. Dennis Wilson drowned off the coast of Marina del Rey in 1983. Carl Wilson developed lung cancer and died in 1998. Eugene Landy died of lung cancer and pneumonia in 2006 while in Hawaii. As of this writing, Mike Love and Al Jardine are still alive. So is Bryan Wilson. In fact, they toured together in 2011 and 2012 with a couple of Beach Boys who had filed through the band over the years. Reports vary as to whether or not Bryan actually enjoyed working with them again. He once famously said that his least favorite part of touring was, quote, going on stage and performing. Bryan's second wife, Melinda, died in January of 2024, and a public announcement revealed that Bryan Wilson had been diagnosed with dementia. Whatever time is left for him, let us hope that his days are filled with a quiet contentment and that his teenage symphonies to God bring him some small comfort. If heaven has a recording studio, it's got a seat behind the control board waiting for Bryan Wilson. And that is a very brief look at the strange relationship between Dr. Eugene Landy, and Bryan Wilson.
Wow. Yeah, very cool.
How messed up is that story?
Yeah, pretty screwed up. Yeah, I mean, and how the hell that guy is still alive? I mean, so when that solo album came out in '88, I remember seeing him on, he tried to do sort of a tour of late night television, and I never saw him live. I remember seeing him 2 or 3 times doing, be on Letterman or whatever, do one song and then be interviewed, and he just seemed completely out of it. Like, are you currently high? What's going on with you? Because he's not making any fucking sense. And so the fact that he's still alive now, 35 years later, 40 years later, like is sort of unbelievable to me.
Yeah, it's astonishing. The dude went through a lot.
Right.
Sources for this story were verywellmind.com to kind of help explain some of the psychological issues. Telegraph.com.uk, the obituary for Eugene Landy in March 31st, 2006. The Independent, Peter Ames Carlin, also wrote an obituary called Eugene Landy, Psychotherapist Bryan Wilson, that was published on April 1st, 2006. Peter Ames Carlin, 2006 book, Catch a Wave, The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of the Beach Boys' Bryan Wilson from Rodale in MSPA and New York City. The NewYorkTimes.com obituary for Eugene Landy by Marguerite Fox, published March 30th, 2006. 2 pieces from biography.com. Tim Ott's Charles Manson and the Beach Boys' Dennis Wilson had a brief and bizarre relationship from September 8, 2020. And Colin Bertram's piece, Inside Bryan Wilson's Mental Health Struggles from December 17th of 2020. SmoothRadio.com, the tragic story of how Bryan Wilson's career was almost destroyed by a rogue doctor by Meyer Nissim. The Internet Archive for the Underground Dictionary, which was last episode. 1971, written by Eugene Landy, Simon & Schuster, New York. And Wikipedia for basic bioinfo on all of the players in this story, the Wilson family, Landy, and Maureen McCormick, Gig Young, the other folks who were patients of Eugene Landy.
Right.
And thanks again to
super interesting.
Thanks again to San Antonio Marvin for suggesting this piece. Yeah, thank you, Marvin.
Yeah, excellent, very cool story. Well, not cool, but interesting.
Well, it makes me appreciate Pet Sounds that much more, I think.
I know, right?
That's for sure.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
And guess what I listened to while writing this?
Pet Sounds?
No, Husker Du. Close.
Fleetwood. my second guess was going to be Fleetwood Mac, but all right. You ready to shift gears?
I am ready to shift gears.
All right. So, my question for you is, do you like a par three shitter? It's a little news story here for you that I have sourced from a couple different places, but the best source. This is a news story that I originally stumbled across. This is just for the curse word, by the way. That was, I think, on TikTok in a short video,
Oh,
and and
wait.
and then I
Okay.
looked into it and found corroborating stories tied to this. So just because I can't improve on the writing on this, I'm literally going to read for you word for word a summary of this story taken from the New York Post from July of 2015, related to well, you'll see. For the past decade, a Norwegian golf course has been dealing with a serial pooper who decides to leave dirty toilet paper and feces at the bottom of holes. United Press International reports Stavanger Golf Course, a scenic waterside course in Hestefjordi, Norway. I'm probably saying that wrong. Claims they have been finding poop in the course's cups since 2005. And the worst part is they have no clue who's been doing it. Groundskeeper Kenneth Tinnistiford told the Ragaland Avis newspaper, quote, he has a couple favorite holes, and we know it as a man. We know it as a man because the poos are too massive to be from a woman, unquote. Tinnistiford said the mysterious pooper only lays his tracks on weekdays, so to speak. The club has tried catching the culprit by installing high-powered lights, but to no avail. Tinnish Deferred goes on to say, quote, he climbed up a tree next to the lights and wriggled out far onto a branch and dismantled them. How he managed the feat without electrocuting himself or falling is a bit of a riddle. So this story was from 2015. Apparently, the clip I saw was from earlier this year. Apparently, this guy is still doing it. He rides his bike onto the course, shits in the hole, and then leaves. And he's still at it. He must really hate golf. But anyway, it's too good of a story not to share.
Well, golf is the biggest waste of prime real estate.
Exactly. So, right. So I'm with him on that front. When I first kind of heard it, I assumed he must poop elsewhere and then just bring it with him and just drop it and run. No, he actually
Oh, he drops trowel right there and pulls a cagagne, huh? He just caganeer,
yeah, because they find the poop and the TP in the hole apparently. So very funny, but very bizarre that someone would do
Somehow
this
the
for.
TP is grosser than the actual
Yeah.
poop. That is. And do they just find it the next day? The first person who plays the holes, like,
yep.
All right. Ain't enough ball washing machines in the world to take care of that. That's
right. Sorry, Norway. But still funny.
The par three shitter. All right.
Okay.
That's pretty brutal.
Yeah, pretty nice. So for my story this week, I'm calling my story, as you will see, El Muerto and Bigfoot. Okay.
Okay.
So more Texas history, and some of this is maybe tangent to another story we've told on this podcast before. And this first source anyway is just straight from the Texas State Historical Association. So this is a really good example of history being told by the victors. Yarns being spun in a way that make a historical figure bigger, better, grander, kinder, a more decent person as we remember them than perhaps they really were in the flesh. So some of this may seem a little bit over the top in terms of its praise for this man. William Alexander Anderson Wallace was born 3rd of April, 1817 in Lexington, Virginia. He was descended from Highlanders William Wallace and Robert Bruce.
Yeah.
And it's said that the clan instinct was strong in him. In 1836, he learned that one of his brothers and a cousin had been killed at the Goliad massacre in Texas. So he set out for Texas to, quote, take pay out of the Mexicans, unquote. Basically, I'm going to go murder some Mexicans. A good many years later, he told a friend of his, a guy named John Duval, that he believed the account had been squared. So he definitely killed some folks. Wallace, it is said, was a magnificent physical specimen. He was 6'2". He weighed 240 pounds, but oh no, he was not fat. He was trim and muscular.
And cock for days.
Exactly. For a period of time, he tried out farming near LaGrange, Texas, but it was not to his liking.
I know where that is.
Spring of 1840, he moved to Austin, and he was present when the last of the buffalo in the region were run down Congress Avenue, but left Austin because, quote, the people were getting too thick. I don't know whether that's too stupid or too fat, but for whatever reason, the people were getting too thick. And he moved to San Antonio. He was with the Texans who fought General Adrian Ball's invading, this is after the Battle of the Alamo. But again, this is a period of time with pretty much constant conflict in Central and South Texas with Mexico. He volunteered for the Somerville and Meade expeditions, and was actually imprisoned for a period of time in the Perote prison. So if you want to get lost in some history, look up the Perote prison. It's in the state of Veracruz, so fairly far south into Mexico. Awful place for decades and decades and decades. But he managed to get out of prison. He was either released or he escaped at one point. Accounts vary. He joined the Texas Rangers when he was back in Texas, and was with the Texas Rangers during the Mexican War. During the 1850s, he was a commander as a captain. He had his own company, so he was fighting bandits. In this account, this is the sort of glowing account. He fought bandits. He fought Indians. He was an expert trailer, so he was frequently called to track down runaway slaves trying to make it out of Texas into Mexico. He drove mail from San Antonio to El Paso on one occasion.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. Back then, I remember making that drive as a child, thinking it took a long time. And lost his mules to Indians and had to walk the last third of the way to El Paso.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And managed to not die. During the Civil War, he again helped the frontier, to help defend against Comanches. One time later in life, he had a little ranch on the Medina River, close to San Antonio, on land given to him by the state of Texas. In later years, he spent time in Frio County, so more westerly, near the small village of Bigfoot. I don't know whether he just adopted the name Bigfoot or whether someone gave it to him. He never married. He was mellow. This article says, quote, he was a mellow and convivial soul who liked to sit in a roomy, raw-hided bottom chair in the shade of his shanty and tell over the stories of his career. Occasionally he'd go to San Antonio. Occasionally he'd visit Austin to see friends. I love this expression. He was honest, and he, quote, liked to stretch the blanket in terms of telling tales. But he was because at the time he was also well read. He was not illiterate like many other frontiersmen. He was handsome, he was humorous, he was vital, and he represented all the good things of the old timey days. Blah 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 blah. So he dies January 7th, 1899. Shortly thereafter, right after his death, the Texas legislature sets aside money to dig up his body from where it's buried. I think out near Uvalde or somewhere in Frio County. And they move his body to the state cemetery, and everyone's happy because Bigfoot Wallace is a man of lore and a man who's secured his place in Texas history. There's another version of the story. So, as we've told in other episodes of the podcast, the second half of the 19th century in Texas and elsewhere was pretty ruthless and rough and tumble. So if you're south of San Antonio or west of San Antonio, or frankly west of the Mississippi, during the Wild Wild West, up until the invention of barbed wire, it was to call it lawless doesn't even begin to describe what it was like. And so this is the backdrop of the Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers, when they were founded, very quickly had a reputation for being complete lawless hardasses because they were the ultimate authority and there was no, justice system. They did what they wanted, pretty much. So the Rio Grande to the south as it is today, is the border between the U.S. and Mexico. But the Mexican government didn't really recognize that as a boundary. They always insisted that the Nueces River was the border between U.S. and Mexico. So you have this gigantic chunk of land between the two rivers, which was a bit of a no man's land and was a fabulous area for outlaws. Um, in the episode on Jean Charles Huzeau, that's when I think I mentioned the expression, "We didn't cross your border crossed us." There are people that are of Latinx descent, whether they identify now as Mexican or Texan or Peruvian, it doesn't really matter. But there's a huge section of Texas. Corpus Christi, I think, is 130, 150 miles from the border. So, thousands of square miles down there where the border kept moving. Okay. So this, dispute between the two countries, forces the U.S. to go to war with Mexico to finally make the Rio Grande the official border. But still, it's an area where there's just a constant scrum of crime and thievery and cattle rustlers and awfulness. And basically, being a rustler was the worst crime you could commit. I mean, murder was fine, but steal someone's horse, steal someone's cattle, and you would be disemboweled, and it would be deemed justified. So the Texas Rangers are this sort of roving posse of gunmen, and it was known that you were not to be messed with them because they were just going to be brutal. Among the Texas Rangers at this time, late 1840s, a man named Creed Wallace and the aforementioned William Bigfoot Wallace. And so 1850, they're in the San Antonio area, and there's a man simply known as Vidal, Vidal, who is an active and enthusiastic cattle rustler, horse rustler, pretty much all over South Texas, Central Texas. Vidal doesn't sound especially like a Spanish name to me, but I'm not really sure if it is or not. But because he was so well known for stealing other people's stuff, he very quickly had a price on his head, dead or alive. It didn't really matter. So summer of 1850, there is a Comanche raid. In one account, I believe that there's a raid up near where is essentially present day Lampasas, and a bunch of folks. I mean, whenever there was a Comanche raid, rangers in the area, if they got wind of it and they were reasonably close, they would move out to fight off the attack. So Vidal takes advantage of Comanche attacks and tries to pay attention of Texas Rangers moving out of the area, because that way he can go and then sneak in behind them and walk off with shit, right? So there's this attack. Vidal gets word that there are some forces in the area that are conveniently for him are leaving the area. And so Vidal sneaks in along with three other henchmen, and somewhere along the banks of the San Antonio River, I think sort of west of town out toward Medina, they go in and steal a bunch of horses. What Vidal does not know is that among this collection of horses are several prized Mustangs that belong to Creed Taylor. Taylor ordinarily would have been one of the ones to me as soon as they got the word that there was a nearby Comanche attack, because he loved killing Comanches. He would have charged out, eager and willing to do just that. But on this most recent attack, Creed Taylor doesn't leave, and with him is Bigfoot Wallace. So Vidal comes through, steals these horses, manages to get away. Creed's ranch is west of San Antonio in a well-known sort of bandit area near the headwaters of the Nueces. And this is a constant problem he had. He was just getting pissed with people stealing his livestock and his horses. So he Vidal absconds with these horses, but in fairly short order, he's being chased after by Bigfoot Wallace, and another rancher who lives nearby named Flores. All three of them are actually really skilled trackers, and they're on Vidal's trail. They find their camp and they wait until nightfall. This is probably somewhere out near what is present day Alice, Texas, somewhere between Alice and San Antonio. They wait until nightfall, and Vidal and his compatriots are asleep. And these guys are just brutally murdered by Taylor, Wallace, and Flores. But killing them isn't really enough. Taylor and Wallace especially want to set an example to deter more criminal behavior, because rustling was such a serious offense. So, the Rangers at this time already had a reputation for stringing people up, disemboweling them, hanging them, shooting them, grabbing the body and chopping them up to pieces for animals to chew on. But then if you came along and you found this, and you were also a rustler, it would hopefully give you pause, maybe to not engage
in
in
such
this
behavior.
right. So, in a fairly dramatic fashion, this hero of Texas history, Bigfoot Wallace chops Vidal's head off, grabs his body, lashes him into the saddle of one of the Mustangs, ties Vidal's hands to the pommel, and basically secures his body upright in the saddle.
God.
They grab his head, somehow latch his stump of a head to a sombrero, and it attaches it to the horse as well with a long piece of rawhide. And then once it's deemed secure and good enough, they take a stick or whatever they have and slap the horse on the ass, and the horse just goes charging off into the no man's land, right? This the flat plains that is South Texas.
Jesus.
So shortly thereafter, this is how legends are born. Stories start to come around of a headless rider going around South Texas there's a body there with no head, but there is a head in a sombrero swinging back and forth as the horse walks. Like, what am I looking at here? More and more,
and
cowboys...
that's how Uber Eats started.
Over time, there are more cowboys, more folks. Again, this is an area that's not very populated now. Back then, it's just there's nobody out there. So more and more cowboys start to see this headless horseman, but over time, the body is getting more and more ragged. It has more and more bullet holes in it and arrows sticking out of it. Because Comanches see it and go, "What the fuck is that?" and shoot arrows at it. And so this is where the legend of El Muerto, the headless one, begins. And so, I mean, El Muerto now is now, becomes part of the lexicon, part of folklore in the area, and all kinds of terrible things and misfortunes can happen. Because if you see El Muerto, that means you're going to be sick. That means your father's going to die. That means the crop isn't whatever, right? There's always this bad connotation, right?
It means you won't get ahead in life.
Right. Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So finally, some number of years later, it's unclear how much later, but at least 10 years, I think, there's some local ranchers who finally see the pony with the body on it near a watering hole near I didn't even look at the map to see if this town is still there. There's near the tiny community of Ben Bolt, which is near Alice, Texas. Body is still strapped to the horse. They manage to catch the horse. They take the body off the horse and bury it in an unmarked grave, and then set the horse free. And so the horse is now unburdened.
And this was years this went by?
This was at least 10 years, 10 or 15, 10
so
or 15
that
years.
Horse, I mean, the saddle sores that horse might have had. I mean, seriously, right. How did that horse survive?
Right. Who knows? I mean, because horses, if they're well taken care of, I think can live 30, maybe even 40 years. But that's in current day when they're stabled and they're cared for and they're,
veterinary medicine's a thing, and
right. And so and obviously I know that there are wild horses in Texas. I have no idea what the lifespan is with those. I would assume way less, but I don't know for a fact. So, so the body's buried, the horse is set free. That should have been the end of it, but because it's now part of folklore, there still are sightings. A jillion years later, a couple traveling near San Diego, Texas, in 1917, are camped outside, and they report that they were by a campfire, and a large gray horse sped past them with a headless man uh, in the saddle, yelling, "It is mine! It is all mine!" And then there's even another headless sighting as late as 1969 in Freer, Texas. Who knows? They were on drugs. They imagine,
It was
that
just two kids in a headless rider costume is what it was.
right. So, but anyway, that story of El Muerto is definitely a real story from sort of Texas folklore. If you look up El Muerto, what I couldn't quite figure out is if there's any connection between El Muerto. There's a comic book series called El Muerto. There allegedly was going to be a movie part of the MC. I forget whether it was the MCU or I don't think that's at all related to the comic book, etc. But there's a comic book character that I think is also headless. I don't know if there's any connection between those at all. Anyway, this is a great example of maybe historians spinning a tale more positively, because Bigfoot Wallace chopped a man's head off and latched his body to a horse. But so this is somewhat similar to, if you want to go back and listen to episode 87, this is similar to the Legend of the Red Ghost that I told way
Right.
back.
That's what I thought of. Yeah.
Probably a year ago now. So
I thought
anyway.
of that. And of course, the obvious one to think of is the Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Right. Oh, yeah, sure. Right.
I wonder where they fit in together historically. I can't remember when the Legend of Sleepy Hollow was written. It had to be written sometime in the 1800s, right? I don't remember.
Yeah, late 18th century. Yeah, right. So 150 years before that. No, I'm sorry, 50 years before this. 50 or 60 years before this.
Also, the distance from the Rio Grande to the Nueces River, that's not an inconsiderable amount.
No, I mean,
when you're thinking about the border.
Well, that's why I mentioned Corpus. I mean, the Nueces comes out in Corpus Christi Bay, and so Corpus Christi to Brownsville. Again, I didn't look. I mean, I've driven that before. 130, 150 miles probably. That's a big ass distance. And so I don't know.
That's crazy, Bryan.
So
how have I never heard of this story?
I don't know. Sources I hadn't heard of it either until just very, very recently. Legendsofamerica.com is where I got most of this content, and then the bio on Bigfoot Wallace comes from the Texas State Historical Association, who really seem to like him. But I think if you latch a body to a horse, you're a bad person.
Well,
but I'm old-fashioned that way.
I mean, if the whole contention is that one of the reasons horse wrestling was bad was because if you did that, you doom that rider to certain death on the high plains, right?
Right.
You took away his source of transportation, his source of escape. You took away all kinds of things. And my grandfather was a real working cowboy for the Granite Hills Hereford Ranch in up in the Hill Country, and the thought of doing that to a horse would be just absolutely horrific. You wouldn't do that to a horse. That's incredibly cruel.
Right.
It's stupid, and it's quite frankly a waste of a good horse. I mean, my God.
Right.
But I guess it was the equivalent of stringing somebody up, but it was like a traveling show for it, where you just sit it out rather than have one head,
right.
one body hanging from a tree. You have terrorizing
a great way to telegraph. Yeah, don't do that. Eesh. So
El Muerto y Bigfoot. That's some good stuff there, Bryan. Thank you very much. That's
absolutely
excellent piece of Texas lore. All right. Well,
another one in the books.
We've come to the end of the trail, partner.
Thanks for listening, folks. We appreciate it. Please give us 5 stars if you can on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Shoot us a review too, if you don't mind. We had a couple of good reviews recently, which are always nice to read. On dreamidiots.com. Drop us a line at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com, Facebook and Instagram at dreamidiots. There even is a very limited. I'm behind on posting stuff to our Patreon. We actually do have a Patreon page with some stuff on it, and we got gobs of more stuff coming soon.
Gobs.
Gobs.
Yes. Thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And as always, don't tie each other to horses and send your corpses off into the old west. No, be good to each other.